Good afternoon. I'm John Lipsky. I'm the Vice Chair of the Bretton Woods Committee. And on behalf of my colleagues, members, and the board, everyone connected with the Bretton Woods Committee, we want to welcome you to this Spring Summit 2025. Now, my friend Austan Goolsbee, who's currently the president of the Chicago Federal Reserve Bank, has taken recently to saying it's hard to see forward because there's a lot of dust in the air. It seemed to me as of April 2nd, it's more like a sandstorm. So let's have a discussion with the managing director who has taken time out of this busy day and this busy week to share with us. So
thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you very much. And of course, it is great to be with the Bretton Woods Committee and the friends of the Bretton Woods Committee. It is indeed time that again puts to the test the resilience of the world economy. But hey, we've been there. We know we can get through it. We published our World Economic Outlook today. For those who may have not seen it, just to give you a summary of it, we recognize that the uncertainty that has been created as a result of the sandstorm leads to revising downwards our growth projections for the world as a whole from 3.3 now to 2.8%. Please notice, this is not a prediction of recession. And for the majority of our members, with very few exceptions, some downgrades are in place. Advanced economies also 0.5 percentage point downgrade. Emerging markets 0.5 percentage point downgrade. When we look into other important macro aspects of the global outlook, inflation continues to trend downwards with a slightly slower pace. Financial conditions have become somewhat tighter, but markets are functioning. And there is no disorderly anything that we should get truly very deeply, seriously concerned about. The uncertainty, as we all know, not good for growth because investors are unsure whether to invest. Consumers are unsure whether they should go forward with their purchases. And that is what primarily causes the projected slowdown. What we are also mindful of is that longer term, should a new world of trade comes to be in permanency, we are likely to see slower productivity growth. Why? Because allocation of resources with the constraint of doing more at home and less trading with others possibly would be less efficient than otherwise. And this is particularly true for smaller economies. What do we do in this environment? What we are very strongly recommending from the fund is first, bring uncertainty down. Find a resolution, come to an agreement of parameters that would then be giving that sense of we know where we are headed. We are here, these are our spring meetings, and this is a very good place, talk with each other, create that sense of we can move to a place where this very heavy cloud of uncertainty, you talk about sand dust, it may be kind of sandy on our heads, that we lift it up. Most importantly, however, we remind our members that whenever you are in a tougher place, a challenge is an opportunity, and the impossible becomes possible. Look at Germany. For many, many years, Germany has been debating whether they should eliminate the debt brake. Where is the debt brake now? Gone. And that is very good for Germany, good for Europe, creates more space, and we hope that that approach to addressing obstacles that for good reasons have been there at this time may help countries to reduce imbalances. China, reduce your imbalance in terms of not consuming domestically enough, create more opportunities for domestic consumption, more incentives for it, take the state to be more appropriately placed in the economy, reduce debt imbalance. In the European Union, are there Europeans in the audience?
Yes, I think there. Yes.
Okay. Europe can complete the banking union. Europe can move to have a capital markets union. And most importantly, eliminate the barriers among countries in the European Union so they trade among themselves more easily. And here in the United States, budget deficit. Bring it down, that would help the US, and of course, all of this would help the world economy. To all countries that are here, I have one very simple message. Get your own house in order. Mm-hmm. There are reforms on the fiscal side. There are actions related to financial stability, to your financial sector, actions that taken together can give you a better standing in a world of more frequent shocks. And finally, I believe we would see more regional cooperation in areas of the world where this makes total sense, whether we talk about ASEAN, or we talk about the Gulf Cooperation Council, or we talk about the communities in Africa that could do better. Or we talk about Central Asia. There is so obviously benefit of stepping up trade among neighbors, creating better conditions for capital flows across borders, and in that sense, very simple. Take challenge, make opportunity. And I hope that we would have some discussions around that at the spring meetings.
So, for sure, in this difficult and uncertain environment, the fund has an important role of analysis, of helping to guide the understanding of the problems and the challenges. Beyond that, what is the appropriate role for the fund in a moment like this?
Well, the fund, as many of you know, is created for conditions like this, when there are complexities, where there are difficulties. And what we contribute is threefold. First, we provide analysis that is objective, based on data from individual countries. We aggregate it and we offer it to the membership so they can see where the world is headed from one and the same place. Second, we translate this analysis into specific policy recommendations for individual countries. And what I can tell you, my colleagues and I are concentrated on is to move more of the capacity, the skills, the abilities of the fund to serve individual countries, because we are no more in a place where, as we were after COVID, everybody faced the same problem, everybody had to do the same thing. Monetary policy accommodation, fiscal policy accommodation, protect the most vulnerable. Different countries face different combination of challenges. For example, in some countries, there could be more the impact of a supply shock. And there is a risk that inflation may go up. In other places, there could be demand shock. The economy may be slowing even more as a result. So, and different countries are telling us, please, IMF, we love you dearly, but don't come with cookie cutter advice to us. And for this reason, John, you would see the fund very focused on what is our biggest contribution to our members: macroeconomic, financial stability, and how countries, what specifically countries can do to enhance it. 3, we are a financial institution. Actually, I look at the last years, almost 100 countries benefited from support from the fund. Right now, we have 48 programs. I spent the last week with our teams scanning the world to see where we are likely to have needs for the fund to step up financially. Either new programs or augmentation of existing programs. And what I can say is that we feel very strongly that we are not going to be helping our members if we are not also strongly defining conditionalities, not in a way of we are imposing on you, but in a way of, if you want to do better, let's see what are the actions you need to take on it. You might have heard me talking about Argentina. In Argentina, we have our largest program. So I look at Jeffrey. He has been there in a previous round. And this time is different. Why is it different? Because Argentina owns the program and is willing to take tough action to change the direction of the country. And that is the kind of support we want to give our members. And of course, since you are here, we also want to bring the membership together to get a good discussion around what are the challenges, what can be done about them.
Mm-hmm. Now, let me give an advertisement to a publication that I think is underestimated, and that is the Managing Director's Global Policy Agenda, which is an innovation of a few years ago that provides an actual specific description of what the fund, how the fund intends to fulfill its role. What is there particularly notable in the latest edition? And I hope that encourages everybody to take a look.
Please do. What is in this edition in comparison to what you have seen, if you looked at it in previous spring and annual meetings, is that this time we thought we need to look into a little bit further into the future. Why? Because we need to decide how to deploy some really important medium-term impacting reviews at the fund. So what you would see is Of course, a lot of attention to the current challenge. In that sense, a simple call: resolve trade tensions. Especially the large economies find a pathway so we can reduce uncertainty, improve conditions for growth. But then we look into what can the fund do to support macroeconomic and financial stability. And we look into what can the fund do in a multipolar world to support strong global financial safety net. On macroeconomic financial stability, there are two reviews that would have significance for how we deploy the fund. First, review of surveillance. How do we define efficient, effective, impactful surveillance that would help our countries and help the global community? And the second one is review of conditionality. What have we learned from conditionality? What does it mean for our programs? How we can go about it? We also would be looking very carefully into the balance of instruments, our lending instruments. What we all recognize is that we are in a more shock-prone world, so building resilience to shocks really matters. But what does it mean for lending? We have, as you probably know, we have the so-called precautionary lending instruments. How do we use them? What do we, that goes also in the review of conditionality, how do we make them effective, given that this is specifically for countries that are strong, that have strong fundamentals? And then we need to look into the way we design shorter and longer term programs. How do we decide whether it is a 9 months or a 4-year program? And a very important question, I'm sure you have been, if you watch the fund, you know that we are wrestling with it. How do we decide about countries that go on and on and on and on, program after program after program after program? Right now, we have 3 of these countries: Pakistan, Egypt, Argentina. There are some others, but these are particularly noticeable. And what we have agreed with the countries is, look, do it right. Let's imagine a future in which you don't have any more programs with the IMF. What would it take to get there? I started my meetings this year with a meeting with the delegation from Pakistan. And I can tell you the program in Pakistan, disciplined, things are improving, you can see it. The only issue there is stay the course, so we don't meander back into. It was amazing. So we are sitting with the minister. He's great, the finance minister of Pakistan. We are sitting there, and I turn to him, and of course I say, stay the course. So he smiles, he shows me his notes, what he's supposed to tell me, and of course there with big letters, stay the course. That is how we want to get. We want to get ahead of this problem of repeat programs. We also have to recognize that there are cases when actually it would take a long time. And we should not pretend that we have a 4-year program, and it's done. But be honest about it. Define engagement that is a longer-term engagement upfront. You will see in the GPA, I mentioned Global Financial Safety Net. We would be looking more thoroughly into the role of the fund, how we cooperate with other elements of the Global Financial Safety Net, the regional financial arrangements, regional institutions, as well as major central banks, especially major central banks that provide swap lines, often in the context of fund programs. Finally, the GPA is to get a message to everybody. The fund walks its own talk. We give advice to countries, focus, be fiscally responsible. We do the same. Maybe not many of you know, but the fund's budget today is, in real terms, what it was 20 years ago. And that gives me a foot to stand on when I talk to my delegation, say, be fiscally responsible, don't spend money you don't have. Here it is. We stick to it.
Very good. But now this sounds like, in addition to dealing with the very short-term challenges and this huge uncertainty, the fund is going to be doing a quite thorough review of how it goes about working. Is this supported by the executive board, I'm sure? Will this be discussed at the IMFC in this meeting?
Yes. I should also add that one issue that came time and again in our engagement with the membership was you, the IMF, you give us good advice on macroeconomic and financial stability, but stability has to be for something. It has to be to support growth. Yes. So can you please be also more proactive in helping us lift our growth potential? So you would see in the GPA more attention to the role of structural reforms that are pro-growth and pro-putting the private sector in the driver's seat of economies. We have already discussed it with our board of directors. I can tell you that the reaction, the engagement was very good, and the reaction is very positive. I will present it during the IMFC meeting with the expectation that we would hear back from members. I'm not just looking for endorsement, I'm looking for how can we do really well for you.
You want engagement.
I want engagement, yes.
As well as endorsement. This is great that
I also want endorsement, don't get me wrong.
But this is great. So dealing with the short term while not losing a focus on how to make the institution work better in the long term. Now, in the short term, one of the problems is, or it looks like it's, if anything, going to get worse, is debt, and especially debt of developing emerging economies. You've been doing a lot of work with this. We've had the common framework has not worked as well as many had hoped. You and President Banga have taken to form the roundtable on debt restructuring. And is that making some progress? Can we look forward to some improvements in how the debt restructuring mechanisms will work?
Let me start by saying that the debt landscape is very different today than it was 15, 20, 30 years ago. It is a kind of multipolar world, and within it, private sector plays a role, public sector plays a role, traditional, non-traditional lenders. I just spent an hour and a half with the Africa Caucus, and you wouldn't be surprised, for them this is a central issue. We talk a lot about it. And what we recognize is that today, dealing with debt is like herding cats. And I was talking to the minister from Ghana. They have had a real cat herding exercise in that restructuring. I asked him, scratches, do you have some? He says, oh, yes, I do. It is important to not be naive about the complexity that most cases, not all cases, but most cases of high debt vulnerability present. And this is why we created the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable, because we realized that the common framework between the new and the traditional and new creditors and individual countries is not making the most important step of defining what is a good debt restructuring process, how we can go about it, and then bringing common view from public sector, from private sector, public, traditional, new, private sector institutions, and the debtor countries themselves. So we sit around the table, we identify what are the challenges, and then we work through those to come up with a solution, a path to solution. Tomorrow we are going to have the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable. It is at ministerial level or leadership from the private sector. And I'm very pleased to preview. Maybe I shouldn't preview, so bad luck, it goes away. But what we are aiming is to have a guidebook on how to do it, how to define timeline, how to define steps, how to go through these steps. And this kind of playbook for debt restructuring is now endorsed by everybody. Meaning that we expect that the next country we go to do debt restructuring, we use the playbook. It may sound like not a big deal, it's actually a big deal. It's a big deal. I also heard from the Africa Caucus something that I'm going to discuss in details with my colleagues. That, yes, that's great, roundtable, playbook, but we, the countries, we expect you, the IMF, you to make sure that restructurings happen, that debt management is done properly. We look up to you. And I think we have to recognize that that means for us to be more active, to be more outspoken, so countries can say, you're doing what we expect you to do. There is a lot of unfinished work on debt transparency. And I think in this world in which we just entered a new period of turbulence, everybody is in a tougher place because we went from shock to shock to shock. But low-income countries, vulnerable middle-income countries, they have no policy space to speak of. Their debt levels are now eating precious resources in a way that is truly devastating. So we have to take this task seriously. We have had successes. I actually was looking at the numbers. Median emerging market economy, external debt service to revenue is now twice as high as it was a decade ago. From 7% in 2014, it went up to 14%. I mean, just imagine what it is. You have your revenues squeezed by, shrinking by 14% in this moment in time. So yes, we would do this, but we also are, again, I go back to our focus. We also would do more in technical assistance, in policy advice for debt management. And I also heard this from countries. They say, sometimes we feel when we come to these debt discussions, we feel like babes in the wood. Here are the wolves, and we need to somehow handle them. Help us in capacity. Also, be there for us. If you need your analysis, please be there to help us.
Yes. And as you know, the Bretton Woods Committee has viewed this as an extremely important issue.
I know, yes. And thank you for what you have presented to us.
Well, and thank you for taking it forward, and let's hope you haven't jinxed the outcome of the roundtable and you have some real success to talk about.
So my plea to the audience and a little prayer. Please play book, come true tomorrow.
One last topic. We're in the midst of some pretty rapid change in terms of the role of the digital everything, but the digital finance. And this is taking various forms. As you know, in some of the member countries, it seems there's real intent to produce central bank digital currencies. Other places, like in the United States, more interest in stable coins. But in essence, it looks like the financial system may be changing in many important ways. What is the fund's view and what is the fund's engagement in helping to not just understand, but to design the architecture for a digital world?
It is already changing, and it is changing in a fairly diverse way across the globe. As you said, there are countries that are pursuing central bank digital currencies. There are countries that are absolutely not going to go for CBDCs. There are countries that are going for stable coins, and there are countries that absolutely ban stable coins. So how do countries make these choices? They have actually turned to us. This is the area where we're getting fastest growth of demand for technical assistance. And what we do is we identify obviously we don't know technology. We take for given this is the technology that is in place. But then what we look into is when this technology is applied, what are the opportunities for countries in cutting down costs of transactions, in facilitating economic activities? What are the risks? And the risks are threefold. One, risk to financial stability. If you get willy-nilly into a place not quite knowing how that may blossom, you may have trouble. Two, we have recognized that quite a number of countries, including large economies like India, are very concerned about their monetary policy sovereignty. They are concerned that, say, dollar stablecoin can invade their policy space and then push the rupiah into a tough place. And three, how do we connect different choices? How can we ensure interoperability in this more diverse world? We see our role in being in responding to demand from members, but also engaging with others, with standard setters, engaging with BIS that has advanced a lot on innovation, with the Financial Stability Board, so we can collectively come up with a good pathway. Technology is very valuable. I think digital money is here. Even if we want to close this, genie is out. Mm-hmm. And the question is how to make a rational, how to minimize risks, how to enhance opportunities, and most importantly, how to provide knowledge to countries about what is going on and how they find their place in it.
So you're happy with the level of fund engagement in developing this area?
I'm happy. You ask my team that works on digital money, they would say, oh, no, we should be doing more. No, I'm actually quite happy. I think that we have positioned the fund. We actually spent time to say, Jeffrey was with us at that time, to say, what is the role of the fund in digital money? And then define comparative advantage, what other people are doing, and not go there, but do what we can do to contribute. So yes.
Well, thank you. I think we've heard a very clear message. The fund is very focused on dealing with what's in front of us with the sandstorm, but is also thinking creatively and importantly on the future beyond the sandstorm. Managing Director, thank you so much for the time, and thank you for your service.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Rebecca Patterson. I am on the board of the Bretton Woods Committee, and I'm absolutely delighted to be with you all today. And with the World Bank President, Ajay Banga, thank you so much for making time for us today.
Thank you.
I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, you'd like a hole in the head.
Yeah. No, it's going to be great. Look, Kristalina Georgieva just told us that the world is slowing down, but there won't be a global recession. A few people this morning at other meetings I was at said maybe the U.S. will have a little recession, but we're not going to talk about the U.S. I want to talk about the countries you're focused on. And in the context of a slowing global economy, you wrote a piece at the beginning of this month in the Financial Times that I thought very clearly laid out your priorities, right? You're looking at energy security, you're looking at private sector investment, and importantly, looking at job creation, not outsourcing jobs from places like the United States, but really organic job creation that's being created through organic growth in these countries. So I wanted to start out with that, just very high level. What are you doing? What is the World Bank doing to drive that growth agenda? How's it going?
So, I mean, look, first of all, thanks for having me every year, and it's nice to see a number of familiar faces. I don't think that you should think of my jobs conversation in the context of changes in the world's global growth estimate. Because I started talking about jobs a year and a half ago. Mm-hmm. And so I want to disconnect the connection of today's volatility and uncertainty, which is the background of the discussion of people estimating whether there will be a recession or there'll be a slowdown. That's the background of that conversation. That's not where I'm coming from. I'm coming from the view that 1.2 billion young people are entering the global workforce. Whether they get a job or not, they're going to become eligible for a job in the coming 12 to 15 years. Currently, the same emerging market countries where these 1.2 billion are coming from are forecast to generate 420 million jobs. Now, forecasts are not destiny, and forecasts are made by economists like friends of mine in the audience. And I will tell you that I used to be an economist, or I'm a recovering economist. And if we make assumptions, and then we project the assumptions, and we sound like we know what we're doing. So don't assume that 420 is correct, but it's not 1.2 billion. There's a huge gap there. And that gap, to me, is a very serious challenge, both for global consumption and its growth, but also for what I'm really worried about, which is fragility, conflict, violence, illegal migration, that stuff. Mm-hmm. And so my view is we don't have 25 years to figure this out. We've got a decade to get ahead of this issue. And if you want to have this demographic dividend not be it should be a light at the end of the tunnel, not a train coming our way, then we need to get ahead of this on jobs. That's where I was coming from. Of course, you can't generate jobs without growth. That's Kristalina's point. But I think it's way beyond that, because growth by itself doesn't generate jobs. You can get growth with a lower level of job creation, or you can get targeted work and policies. So, for example, our Jobs Council, which is chaired by President Tharman of Singapore and former President Michelle Bachelet of Chile, we just had our meeting yesterday as well again. And we had a big jobs kickoff meeting a little while ago in the World Bank. And essentially, we've got three things that need to happen. Infrastructure, which enables, bridges, roads, airports, schooling, education, healthcare, digital, electricity, stuff like that. Regulations that enable the flywheel to work. Land reform, labor reform, bankruptcy law, mobile collateral law, electricity tariffs, those kinds of words. And then you need to get the private sector, whether small, medium, large, global or local, farmers or businesses, to actually generate the jobs. That connection of the three, we think we are uniquely positioned to help. We have IDA and IBRD that do infrastructure. We have the Knowledge Bank that understands regulatory reform. And more, we are putting our policy budgetary support to countries directly connected to changes in laws. Today, 54% of our budgetary support is paid on a pay-for-results basis. You change the law, we'll give you the money. You don't change the law, you're not getting the money. So to give you an example, if I want you to make the utility, electricity utility in your country more capable of surviving, that means you need to change the tariffs you charge. Ideally, you should charge more from people who can afford to pay more and less from people who can't afford it. So rather than just raise the price across the board, you need intelligent meters to be installed. You need the cost for that. I'll cover that through a budgetary operation. Mm-hmm. But I'll give it to you if you announce the change in policy. See what I mean? Mm-hmm. And then you can get the private sector with IFC and MIGA and ICSID, our Settlement of Investment Dispute Arm, to kind of help get that flywheel going. That's what we're talking about. And we're talking about 5 sectors. And the 5 sectors we are discussing are sectors which do not require the outsourcing of OECD jobs into the developing world. And I've been saying this for the past years. The challenge of the old model of trade, which said, take a job from here and move it there, is a very challenging model. We need to think a little bit differently about this. And one of the ways we can think about it is these 5 sectors. What are the 5? Infrastructure, bridges, roads, airports, stuff, constructed. The construction, but the enablement. Second, agriculture as a business. Mm-hmm. If you want smallholder farmers to stop selling their land and becoming urban poor, then start thinking about their productivity with cooperatives, better access to fertilizer, seeds, crop insurance, that kind of stuff, markets, that space. Third is primary healthcare, not just because you'll get a healthier workforce, but because you will get employment for nurses, medical diagnostic technicians, midwives, PPE manufacturing, pharma manufacturing, that space. Fourth is tourism, with all the benefits it brings. And fifth is manufacturing, both for local consumption and regional and bilateral deals. But take minerals and metals that the emerging markets are full of. If you start doing the right kind of value-added manufacturing locally, then everyone benefits. Mm-hmm. These are not traditionally the way that the old method of growth in East Asia worked. And so it's a different way of doing it. And I just think it's worth paying attention to. So I said somebody asked me in the jobs session, what's your closing comment? And I said, listen, a friend of mine once said that poverty is a state of mind as much as it is a state of being. The being is the earning, the mind is the dignity of a job. Mm-hmm. A job is the best way to kill poverty. You don't get jobs by relying on governments alone. You need to get the private sector in the game. We have to understand how to play this flywheel the right way. And that's the effort I'm trying to make. And if we do this well, the private sector wins, governments win, MDBs win, but most importantly, young people win. Yeah. And I don't understand what the heck is wrong with that idea. There's nothing wrong with that idea.
There's nothing wrong with that idea.
That's the purpose.
So what you laid out,
though... It's a long way to explain.
No, it's great. I appreciate you being comprehensive about it. We're talking about trying to get a lot done in a decade or so. So these young people coming up in age are going to have jobs. We don't have that migration, social unrest, et cetera, right? We have the positive light instead of the train wreck. But getting all that done in what frankly is a short period of time requires moving pretty quickly, being very efficient. And I've had the opportunity to hear you here before, and you've talked a lot since you joined the World Bank almost 2 years ago now about efficiency and making the World Bank operate more efficiently. And you've talked about markers you have, things you're doing. Give us an update. How is that going?
By the way, just before I do that, the effort to connect 300 million people to electricity in Africa,
yes,
which we call M300, is built on the premise of getting the right regulatory reform done in countries for the private sector to come in.
And that's a great example of this, right? 300 people in 300 million, people in Africa by 2030.
Yeah.
That is fast.
Yeah.
So if you're going to get that done on time or close to on time, I'm going to give it to you. You're going to be on time. Then you've got to do this super efficiently. How do you do it?
Well, so you do various things. And the first thing is you get the bank to be more efficient and faster. So it used to take us 19 months on the average to take a project from conversation to approval through the board. We're now down to 14 months, and my target is 12 by the end of Jan. I think a couple of my regions are already below 12. A couple of them are still higher than 12. So I got to figure out where the average comes in. But more importantly, inside the average are lots of projects that are getting approved in 30, 60, and 90 days.
That's great.
So a healthcare clinic set in Kenya is approved in 30 days. A correspondent banking system for the Pacific Islands to enable them to continue to offer banking, which otherwise was becoming a problem, was approved from start to finish in 8 months. But a hydroelectric dam in Central Asia will take 3 years because it's complicated.
Yeah.
It's got all kinds of implications, from construction challenges to land acquisition challenges to ESF issues. It's got hair on it, right? Like me. So the trouble is, you gotta treat that differently from somebody else, and that's the kind of thing that's inside the 12-month average. The second thing we're doing is 40 countries now have a single country manager for the World Bank Group. No longer an IFC head, no longer a IBRD ID head. It's one person. So you as a client in the country have one person to go to. You don't have to go to the same project. It's a public-private partnership. I got to get IDA to do this and IFC to do that, and you go to one person, one system through it. We signed in collaboration with the Asian Development Bank. We've now signed what people have wanted for 35 years, a full mutual reliance framework. What does that mean in English? If I do due diligence and they're co-financing with me, they accept my due diligence. If they do it, I take it. Which means you as a client don't go through 2 diligences with banks, you go through one. That kind of stuff, a digital platform in which all the MDBs now put their projects and we co-finance off it as compared to I source it, then I take it to him and then to her and make that 3 times for the client. That's now one platform. 170 projects are in it. $14 billion of financing has already happened. All this is in the last 8 to 10 months. Similarly, we've raised about $100 billion through capital adequacy measures, loan to equity ratio, hybrid capital, portfolio guarantees, that kind of stuff. That to me is interesting, but it's over a decade, so who cares? The more interesting parts are the speed and the working better across the group. What I'm now trying to get to is to get the corporate scorecard completely ready. We committed to go from 155 items to 22. We've gone from how many projects and how many dollars financed to how many people got a better job because of a skilling institute we set up. Not only that, you can go on the website, you can click on each of these, and you can click your way down to the individual project. And I know that's going to get us into trouble because I won't always meet what I thought we would do. But I think sunlight is my best friend. Sunlight's a disinfectant. And so hiding stuff is not what I want to do. I'd rather have it out there and say, here's what's working, here's what's not, and we're not doing fine on all 22, we're doing fine on 11 of them, and that's fine. And trying to get our system to be cohesive, simple, and transparent is what that efficiency is all about.
I think there's some advanced economies who would like to hire you out. Efficiency.
Like a hole in the head.
So,
I do this for 5 years, and I'm going to be sitting on that side of the chair.
So I want to pivot and talk about another priority of yours that you wrote about in the Financial Times article, which was energy security. And it feels like there's a bit of a shift in thinking, a shift in focus going on with the Mission 300 project, and also kind of a review, if you will, of the bank's energy financing policy, including reviewing nuclear as an energy source. Talk to us a little bit about that. Where are we going with nuclear? Where are we going with the project, bigger picture?
So, I mean, you've probably heard me speak at civil society town halls and earlier about the importance of gas as a transition fuel. Of the 5% of our annual financing that goes into energy, 1% has gone to gas, 4% has gone to every other form of mostly renewable energy, geothermal, hydroelectric, solar, and wind. Nothing to nuclear for 60 years now. My belief is that all the old calculations of electricity requirement and the ability to deliver those with that mix of energy mix is not going to work, because AI is going to change everything by a factor of who knows what multiple. And so in June last year, July last year, I asked the IAEA chief, Rafael Grossi, to come across to the World Bank to speak to our board about the possibility of us reconsidering nuclear financing. And we did a preliminary strategy conversation with the board. As you can imagine, it was a fairly divided conversation. Some countries were very supportive. Others thought that I was completely crazy. And others were like, let's see what happens when he finishes with this. Completely understandable. Fast forward, I met a number of people in different parliamentary systems. One of them, I think, is coming here to speak. You've got French coming in a little while. I met French. I met people in the US Congress. I met people in Europe with the European commissioners and in the European parliaments. I met people in Africa and Asia. And everybody indicated a level of interest in the topic of nuclear, in addition to gas as the transition fuel. So I kind of came back and said, I think I'm on the right side of this. And I'd like to find a way to get us to be a constructive partner in this. Now, that doesn't mean I can see the World Bank going out tomorrow morning and financing a $50 billion nuclear plant in some country, because we know whatever be the estimate, it's going to take twice the time and twice the cost, a bit like your apartment renovation. Right? Whatever estimate your contractor gives you, good luck with that. It's twice the amount and twice the time. And if somebody has a contractor as a family member, I apologize, right? But that's been my experience in the last 15 years. And so nuclear is a bit like that. So I don't know if that's what I want to do. But can I help with extending the life of existing plants? Can I go with the IAEA on missions to help do that? Can I begin to look at small modular reactors and try and figure out how do we get from here to there? Meaning everybody's talking about this technology as the thing that will come, but nobody's seen it come yet. And so could we be the catalyst that helps in some way to help with the IAEA to create standards, to focus on one or two versions compared to the other two? Could we take a position of, like in solar cells or computer chips, if you place a last enough order, will you bring down the cost per unit? I don't know. Or Operation Warp Speed, when COVID happened, and the fact that the US government came back to support the idea for Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J to go out there and produce the vaccine. You know, we got to start thinking like that, because otherwise we're waiting for Godot, and I ain't waiting for Godot. So that's what I'm trying to get into with nuclear. I don't know that I have all the answers yet. In June, we're going to go back to the board with a discussion on the full nuclear piece, the full gas piece, the full renewable energy, and talk about this as a way to help with transitions, but also as a way to enable access to affordable energy across the world. We cannot have 600 million people in Africa without electricity and then tell them, you got to wait for solar and wind to come your way, because we all know you need base load. And base load will come from geothermal, hydro, gas, or nuclear. That's the 4 ways to get base load. There is no other way. And, you know, that's what I'm working on.
So you mentioned AI, and we're in a digital economy increasingly. Kristalina and John talked about this a little bit in the prior session. You need electricity to get AI going.
I'm going to give the mic back to John.
He'd be great. How are you thinking about AI? What lessons from MasterCard are you bringing to your seat today as you think about these economies? We know it's going to unlock so much opportunity.
Yeah.
At the same time, I was speaking to someone last night who's at one of the big LLM companies saying he's really worried in the next 2 or 3 years we're going to have major job displacement. So how do we incorporate that conversation with countries that are still struggling to get electricity? How does it all come together?
I think the job displacement issue,
that's more here.
Developed world conversation. And I think it has something to do with professional service jobs before anything else, which is a interesting problem and a serious problem, but that's not my area of expertise. Although I could, if I'm not the World Bank president, it is my area of expertise from my prior life, but not an appropriate conversation for me here. For me, it's the emerging markets I'm concerned with. And I'll tell you my concern there and the positive. The concern is that big AI requires 4 things. Computing power, lots of it. Electricity, a heck of a lot of it. Data, lots of it, the more the better, kept in its simplest form so it can be manipulated properly with safety, privacy, and security guaranteed. That's a lot of ifs. And then the 4th item is you need people who understand how to manipulate that to create the algorithms and capacity to create the predictive power of AI. I don't know too many emerging markets that have those 4 things, right? And then I have the concern that data tends to be seen very quickly as a national security item. And so the cross-border transshipment of large quantities of data of your citizenry, the more you do it and the more you combine it with others, the more the predictive power of the data. But now you are getting into lots of nationalism and lots of national security challenges with the data. So I don't know how easy this will be in the coming 5-6 years. That's the first part. That's big AI. Small AI, which is, to my mind, can I use data about soil testing patterns in a country to build fertilizers that are appropriate for the different regions of that country? So we give nitrogenous fertilizer where it's needed and phosphatic where it's needed. That I could see as a really cool thing.
Right.
Can I use that same kind of AI to help with crop insurance in that country? Possibly. So I want to divorce this global AI concept with large OECD Chinese firms who will fight for supremacy. And that's a fair fight. That is my prior life. It's perfectly fine. But I've got to be careful whether that will really work for the emerging markets or whether small AI is a better bet for the World Bank to help get them used to the idea of the power of this information to change their daily lives and impact those jobs that I want to create, as compared to worrying about the negative spin around the other 4 ideas. And so that's where I'm going. Now, it's early days in our thinking, but that's kind of where we are.
So using AI to make the World Bank itself more efficient.
Oh, that work is already
right.
happening. I mean, we're doing stuff with AI currently. We do things from, in Brazil, we used AI to work on tracking and figuring out fraud in government procurement systems. That stuff's already going on. I'm declaring that as it'll happen and it'll grow.
Right.
I'm talking about a much bigger concept.
Getting it into some of the emerging
Into
markets
every
so they can get
country's-
used to it and it
You
can
got it.
become part of the
got it.
ecosystem,
You
even
got
if
it.
they're not the next OpenAI or Anthropic.
You got it.
Yes.
Employees and working with the countries we're already working with to start using AI, you should take that as something I'm doing anyway.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about a much bigger issue.
That's good. I didn't realize you were using it so much within the World Bank.
It's there I just give you the example of Brazil. I could give you examples of underwriting for MSMEs and for micro entrepreneurs. There's a whole series of uses. Now, on a scale of 0 to 10, I think we're at 3 on 10 or 2 on 10. But I'm kind of, if you get to 6, I'll move the bar. So we go back to 3. So that's just,
Okay. So
that's how I work.
So we're in a world today where advanced economies in particular have very limited fiscal space. We're seeing foreign aid cut
Yep.
by some countries, including here in the United States. So the World Bank getting support from the private sector becomes all the more important. We were here in October, and we had the pleasure of having Shriti Vadera from the Private Sector Investment Lab come speak with us. And there was a lot of great rhetoric. I would love to get a progress report from you.
Sure.
What are we seeing actually happen?
Sure. So just to be clear, I actually don't think the private sector importance has anything to do with the reduced aid. I think the aid amount is a pimple on a dimple on an ant's left cheek compared to what is required for development to actually happen. You can look at anybody's estimates of anything, and it's trillions a year. Whether it's energy, it's poverty, it's food security, it's trillions. So if aid reduces in ODA terms from X% to Y%, that's lovely, it's a rounding error. The real issue is there is not enough money in governments, even the richest ones. There isn't enough money in MDB balance sheets, no matter how many tricks we play with loan to equity ratios and hybrid capital and portfolio guarantees and all that. And there isn't enough money in philanthropies either. You have to get the private sector where it makes business sense with the right rules of the game to be a player in that space. That's the logic of the private sector lab. And it predates all this current circumstance of aid.
Yeah.
The lab's got 5 work streams, which came out from the conversations. The first one was, if I don't have regulatory policy certainty, I'm not taking my money to that country. I'm going to take my marbles and play elsewhere. That I already spoke to. That's what 300 million mission is all about. We're doing this. That's where the pay for our results with our 50-odd% of our DPO money is. That's all connected to that idea. The second one was, even if I do that, I need political risk insurance. We used to do insurance in different parts of the bank. We put it together under MIGA. We are simplifying its structure, making it easier to access. We're already up 30% compared to last year. The stuff has all been put together. Getting it put together was an interesting experience in an institution like the World Bank, but we got it done. And now we're in the process of figuring out simplified due diligence, simplified ESF, simplified processes. My ambition is at least doubling, if not trebling, the insurance business by 2030. The third thing was, would you be willing to take us, junior equity, first loss, to get projects in the emerging markets that may not meet the exact standard of return for the private sector, but are close enough to get pushed over the edge? And that sounds like a great idea in terms of catalyzing private investment. The problem is, if we actually book the loss, at some point, I have to go back to my shareholders to get capital, and that's not a pleasant experience. So I'm trying to figure out a way to avoid the unpleasantness of that while getting to first loss. And we've created a fund called the Frontier Opportunities Fund. Started off with 100 million of our own retained earnings in IFC. But now we're out there shopping it to philanthropies and others to join us so we can create the catalytic capital in first loss terms that needs to be going in to get this work done. We don't need trillions. We need a couple of $1 billion because the multiplier effect is very large of that catalytic capital. The fourth item was, can you help with foreign exchange? And foreign exchange is the holy grail. If you're investing in Indonesia and it's a 30-year project and you're going to be having a 30-year exposure to the Indonesian rupiah, that's complicated.
Yeah.
By the way, a 30-year exposure to the euro is pretty complicated too. And these days, it's to the US dollar as well. It's pretty complicated too. So I just think that believing that you can get a 30-year hedge is not going to happen. So what I'm trying to do there is increase our local currency mobilization by doing swaps with local banks for their and local corporates for their currency availability, and then using that to fund projects. And
So it's all local
it's
currency.
all happening. And the IFC is now almost 40% of its financing is local currency. It was 20-odd% a little while ago. I won't get to 80 by doing this. I've got to find other tricks of the trade to get past that. And then the last item, to me, is the most exciting. And that's what Doug Peterson, whom some of you know used to run S&P till recently, he's leading that for us, is that can we create an asset class in some of these things, in infrastructure, in water, in things like that. You see, the whole issue with, I know we run out of time, but I'm going to finish this. The whole issue is this thing of trillions from the billions out of the pipe dream, because the trillions are sitting with pension funds and asset managers. Pension fund CIOs don't invest money project by project. The way they look at their book is, can you get me, if I go to a pension fund and say, hey, CPP, whatever it's called, Canadian Pension Plan, if you are interested in exposure to water, I could give you loans. And then I give him 20 loans, in 18 countries, 20 million here, 100 million there, 15 million there, bespoke agreements. He's going to say, go away and come back when you grow up. But if you package it together with standardized loans, with a rating agency wrapper on it that says this package put together is B+ paper, and you can buy it at 94 cents the dollar. Now they'll say, this fits in my risk-return matrix in the following way. That's how the mortgage market got built in the US. It's what we need to do with this class. That's what we're working on. It's the hardest item. It's the biggest pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And thank God, as Doug is driving it for us, along with BlackRock and a few asset managers and pension funds, and we'll see where we go. But that's the work going on. All 5 items are tangible. There's work in progress. There's actual outcomes. And
That last one, probability you get there during your tenure?
pretty high.
More than 50?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take that. Listen, thank you so much for your time, always, your candor. I'm excited to go on your website and check all your metrics. But we really
Don't write me complaints. I get enough as it is.
thank you so much, President.
Thanks. Ajay.
So it's a great pleasure to be here and welcome you all here today as chair of the Bretton Woods Committee. Thank you. We have a great panel today to focus on harnessing innovation, both financial innovation and artificial intelligence innovation for economic growth. I have 4 very distinguished panelists to help us explore those issues. I'm going to start with the official people, Klaus Knot, who's the president of the Netherlands Central Bank. He's been president for quite some time, even though you're much, much younger than I am. And he's head of the Financial Stability Board, which plays a very important role in digital finance space. Next to Klaus, Hester Peirce, who's a commissioner of the SEC, and she's chair of the SEC's Crypto Task Force. Next to me, Dante Desparte, who's the Chief Strategy Officer, Head of Global Policy and Operations at Circle. And at the far end, my colleague, and we've worked a lot together on BWC papers, Siddharth Tiwari, who's a senior advisor to India as India's taking on the G20 presidency, and he's a vice president at the International Finance Forum. So I'm going to plunge right in, ask the first question. So this is a very broad one. What financial innovations do you think have the greatest potential to enhance productivity and increase inclusion? So why don't I start with you and we'll just go down the line.
All right. Well, first of all, it is an honor to be on the stage with such an august group and great to share a stage with you again, Bill. So there's one piece of the puzzle which is, I think, fair to ask in this environment. We're living in a global economy where we have to do more with less. I think that's the broad value proposition that we're all contending with. And so technology and innovation for the sake of it is not the answer. The answer, and I think so many people have asked this of my industry, digital assets and crypto, is why are we doing this in the first place? And I've always tried to anchor the way I've approached it and the way we've approached this at Circle from the lens of we're trying to complete unfinished work, either in the payment system or in the banking system. And so that to me is often the best framing. If your financial needs took bank holidays, then there was no reason to innovate around banking and payments. But the fact is, you and I can't wait necessarily for fast payments. And so if you were looking at just the architecture of moving money around the world, around and outside of the walled garden environments, then we need infrastructure that could actually reach people in a device-centric way. So that's always one of the starting points. And so therein, it's hard to ignore the benefits of open blockchain infrastructure, for example, as a common ledger. Financial services shareware would be one good way to describe it, as a common ledger that enables this activity to at least have the common ledger be the medium of exchange or the rails. The second piece of technology is obviously mobile wallet infrastructure. If you were designing M-Pesa for the 21st century, you would probably turn to open financial infrastructure at the wallet level, because in the end, that is also the end point for the activity itself. And then the last piece of the puzzle, in some ways, is cryptography is the long form of the term crypto. Unfortunately, the term crypto is evocative in the minds of its opponents and proponents of very opposite ends of the spectrum. But if you use the long form, cryptography, it's the same technology that allows these flights that we take to have redundant systems and to have the presumption of privacy, for example, in our financial lives. I think those are very powerful core technologies that over time, we're definancializing the technology itself and starting to see it for what it is, general purpose infrastructure that incumbent institutions and startups alike can use to go places where money could not go if it just stayed analog.
So I'm going to beg off a little bit in the sense that I'm a regulator, not a technologist, so it's a little bit hard for me to identify those trends ahead of time. But I will say one thing I find promising is technologies that can disintermediate, that can take away the big central intermediaries and allow people to engage in peer-to-peer transactions that can lead to a more resilient financial system, and it can also lead to an elimination of barriers to entry that may have existed in the past for certain people. It makes it easier for everyone to participate in the financial system on the same terms. So that's something I'm excited about.
Well, Hester said it very well. As a regulator, of course, it's not our role to pick the winners here in the industry. What our motto in dealing with digital innovation has always been that we want to try to harness the benefits while mitigating the risk. And these are two sides of the same coin, as far as we are concerned. Obviously, digital innovation has a lot of promise when it comes to increased efficiencies, better tailored customer propositions, also better possibilities for financial inclusion. But at the same time, if you think about the other side of the coin, the risks, many of the risks are actually not all that different from the traditional risks that we see in the financial system: credit and liquidity risks, operational risks, governance risks. They just manifest themselves in a different way than traditional financial products do. But our role is really to be as technology neutral as possible. So we try to put in place the safeguards or the guardrails, however you want to name it. And within these guardrails, obviously, there should be room for financial innovation. And then it's for those in the industry to decide what will be the winners within these restrictions.
Okay, so I'm going to take a different angle on this. Global growth this morning got revised down to 2.8%. And for the next 30, 40 years, 3/4 is going to come from middle, low-income countries, and largely from Asia. So the question is, what kind of technology is useful for keeping growth up in Asia? Excluding China, there's a demographic dividend. The median age is 28. So you can join the dots that technology is really important. And in Asia, digital public infrastructure powered by AI will be the single most important driver of growth, of increase in productivity in the next 10 to 15 years, and the single vehicle to scale it up, to go from 1 to 1 billion in 2 to 3 years. And so many of you are thinking, oh, he's pushing in the area of getting the state involved and all that. Absolutely not. Digital public infrastructure started in the US. Internet and GPS are two prime examples that the Department of Defense gave us. And the private sector built on that. So the estimates are that increase in growth is anywhere from 5 to 10%. These are large numbers. In Asia, Estonia is 2% a year that they've been able to get. The work done at BIS earlier said that not only does it allow you to leapfrog, meaning that India, through its digital public infrastructure, was able to do in the financial sector in 8 years, where traditional processes would have taken 50 years to do. But importantly, it targets the marginalized groups. And those are the groups that get left behind in the traditional development model. So if you look at the Indian story, the marginalized groups, men and women, rich and poor, high school education, without education, employed, unemployed, the gaps went from high teens to low single digits. And so that's the push that is needed in Asia to get there. The risks are obvious, and we can talk about it a bit later. But that's, I think, a single major push.
I think the financial inclusion is also a potential huge benefit, and that's particularly important in low-income countries. I mean, Africa, for example, could benefit enormously by having a digital infrastructure because the continent is pretty broken up into a lot of different countries. There's not a lot of trade between African countries with each other. And so you can certainly imagine a system that allows for more savings, more capital deepening, more investment. And so it's not just about the financial instruments, what the macroeconomic consequence of having that is. I'm going to turn to a much more narrow subject now, which is stablecoins. I'm going to turn to Klaus and Dante on this. So stablecoins, the Financial Stability Board has laid out some regulatory principles for how responsible innovation would look like for stablecoins and digital assets. So I'd like you to assess, like, from your perspective, Klaus, how do things stand? Do you feel like enough progress has been made in sort of spelling out what good looks like? And if we do get the appropriate regulatory regime, what kind of benefits do you think that would unlock? So Klaus first, and then Dante.
Okay, well, first, let's take a step back. I think it was in 2023 when we came out with two sets of recommendations, actually one for crypto assets and crypto markets, and one for global stablecoin arrangements. And one of the reasons why we felt that the time was ripe to come forward with these recommendations was that we saw that the potential for systemic risk in the crypto space became larger, in the sense that not only did the sector itself grow larger, but also the interconnectedness with the traditional financial system became more manifest, taking on leverage, for instance, which is always something that we are very watchful of at the Financial Stability Board. And so we came forward with two sets of recommendations, also because we fundamentally believed that these were two different types of animals. And when it comes to stablecoins, obviously one important difference with other crypto assets, if I may use that term, is that there is this stabilization mechanism. There are rules around redemptions, and there is typically a slightly different governance surrounding the stablecoin. So we came up with these requirements in 2023. They are, of course, recommendations. We don't issue regulations, we issue recommendations. And it was crystal clear, and it continues to be crystal clear, that these recommendations can only be successful if there is some form of global implementation. Because if there is one business that is cross-border, nowadays you can take a server under your arm and put it in any jurisdiction and start issuing digital assets if you want to do so. So these recommendations set a sort of minimum standard. They are not very prescriptive, and they are meant to be not very prescriptive, in the sense that we do believe that jurisdictions have their own specificities and should therefore also have the space to implement. But as I already said, they can only be effective if there is global implementation. Now, implementation is, I think, variable. Some jurisdictions are a bit farther progressed than others. We will have an implementation review that we will carry out this year to take stock of where we exactly are in implementation. But it's clear that stablecoins, they warrant our attention, because compared to other crypto assets, they fulfill potentially more roles, more money-like roles, as a means of payment, also as a store of value. They have a higher pretense, already in the name stablecoin. I think there is stability in there is money in there, which I think sits aside from other crypto assets. So we will have to watch how far progressed our individual members are with respect to implementation. But it is crystal clear that we need global implementation, and we need also global cooperation, information exchange, etc.
I think it's fair to say the U.S. has probably lagged behind, and that's sort of important given that most stable coins are actually denominated in dollars.
Well, recommendation number one is actually that there is clarity about which regulator is responsible for what part, and I believe that this is currently being filled out in the U.S., right? I mean,
finally, right?
Well, that's your word.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's probably useful for the audience to define what it is and why it is. So, if you think about the vast majority of the world's payment systems innovations are really messaging innovations, instructing which balance sheet to debit and credit. And along comes the stablecoin, which Klaus and others are right in having looked at it with skepticism over the last many years, and the global regulatory conversations I partly feel to blame for with a small stealth mode startup called Libra. That never launched, but nonetheless really catalyzed a lot of the global regulatory reactions to it. But why it's a breakthrough in payments is because for the first time we now have an asset that can achieve settlement finality the moment the sender and the receiver send it to each other. And so therein lies, frankly, I think it's the purpose, the why do these things exist in the first place. They were also trying to solve, quote, crypto's original sin, which was buyers and spenders remorse. That if Bitcoin were to emerge and the Bitcoin blockchain was to emerge as a payment system or electronic money on the internet, its mathematical scarcity created a problem. And that problem was that the second you went and bought a bunch of pizza with your Bitcoin and you realized the next day you bought $80,000 worth of pizza for yourself and your 15 friends, wasn't a great use of what is today being akin to digital gold. But at the same time, any stablecoin issuer that ignored the pre-existence of electronic money rules, state-based oversight, and here in the United States of money transmission and payment activities, did so at their own peril. And so you had quite a lot of examples of stable and name-only coins like Terra Luna, which famously blew up over the course of a weekend, and many others. And so the category now lives, frankly, if you're a stablecoin issuer and you choose to be unregulated, it's because you chose to be unregulated. Even here in the United States, we have two pieces of legislation that advance that. Our model is laissez-faire. If you're going to do nothing, at least do no harm. And it's not surprising that the dollar is the reigning currency in the age of the internet. But it would be helpful to actually have federal rules so that companies like mine don't face the rest of the world and have dollars more regulated in Europe or elsewhere around the world than we have here in the United States. But that's the whole function of this activity. And I think Sir John Cunliffe, formerly with the Bank of England, said, the firms that survive these, quote, crypto winters and blowups may very well be the Amazons of the future. And I think part of what we all should push for is that future is much more distributed. Ajay Banga said recently at the Economic Club that people are everywhere, but opportunity is not evenly distributed. For the first time, these technologies actually allow us to envision a much more competitive and participatory financial system than the one we have today. And I think for that alone, we ought to encourage the innovation from an opportunity-based lens rather than a risk-based lens.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Commissioner Peirce about a comment she made 5 years ago. She said that dealing with the SEC on crypto assets was like a regulatory version of an escape room. I've never been in an escape room, but apparently it's like you're looking for clues to try to solve some sort of problem, and apparently very difficult to get out of the escape room. So I'm curious, Commissioner Peirce, as chair of the SEC Crypto Task Force, how are you going to resolve this escape room problem?
Well, I hope more successfully than I did when I was in an actual escape room where I did not manage to get out without help from the Deus Ex Machina. So this time we're trying to make the clues a little bit easier. And what we're trying to do is essentially identify areas where things are not within our jurisdiction. So speaking of stablecoins, the staff put out a statement recently saying, stablecoins that meet these criteria are not within the securities realm, and I think that's helpful for people to know. And then we're trying to identify things that are within our jurisdiction, and with things within our jurisdiction, we're trying to work to provide guidance around disclosure, and then also guidance around registration in a way that's achieves the objectives of the SEC, but is also commercially feasible. And so I think that we can get there with with some interim steps of providing guidance, and then we're working toward longer steps of regulatory clarity, and then, of course, working with Congress as they're working on legislation. And I think that that method will be very helpful. We're trying to get a lot of input from people. We're having roundtables. We have one coming up on Friday. We're meeting with lots of people, getting written input, and I think trying to do this in a way that makes sure we're taking into account the pain points that people have, but also the need that people have for good disclosure so that they can make good decisions about whether or not to participate in this. And we've seen a lot of interest, so I think it's positive, but a lot of work.
So I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. So stablecoin, is it a commodity, is it a security, or is it money?
Well, I mean, I think...
Because that's what some of the fight
I
has been
think
about.
our point is to say, look, it's not, if you take a stablecoin that's not paying a yield, it's not within the security category, and what we did lines up, I think, well with what Congress is working on. And so I think then it's likely that stablecoins, and I should let Dante speak to where he thinks this will end up, but I think it's likely that stablecoins will end up in the prudential regulator's wheelhouse instead of the SEC's wheelhouse.
Yeah, I think it's probably right. I'm going to turn to Siddharth and contrast India and Asia with the U.S., where there's been a lot more progress made. So what is it about India and Asia more broadly that's able to make so much progress in terms of faster payments, digital finance? I mean, it stands in stark contrast to the U.S. I mean, if you look in the United States, for example, you have FedNow, and CHIPS has a fast payments system, but the usage is like de minimis. And in India, it's a really important part of the financial infrastructure.
So I'm going to borrow a little bit from Bill's work that all of you should read, but embed it in the Indian structure. So I'll talk a little about the financial sector, but it's equally applicable to health, education, e-commerce across the board. So 4 points. 1, the initial conditions matter. There was no legacy system. There were no cards like the US, totally dominated by cards. There was no e-commerce. China completely dominated by Alipay and WhatsApp Pay. It's a region where there are low-ticket, high-volume transactions. And so you have to get to 1 billion really fast, otherwise it's not going to work. So what was important here, supportive policy framework. In most of these countries, the government has taken the initial step to define in broad terms what the agenda is. I think in many of these, the financial system has been the first to digitalize. So you need a supportive central bank in this setting. And if the financial system digitalizes, the best practices, like whether it's open, interoperable, and all, they cascade down to other sectors. China, US did not do that. So you had the e-commerce sector digitalize, Amazon, Tencent, and you end up with what we were talking earlier about walled gardens that are completely insulated from competition. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Then the design principles, which are fairly clear. It needs to be open. It needs to be interoperable. One key thing in Asia, as opposed to US and Europe, is that it needs to be modular and reusable. These monolith systems that are massive, they're very expensive. Second, the upgrade in technology, it's really expensive to do it. And they don't last. In Asia, largely speaking, these systems are fintech, big tech friendly. Like if you look at the Indian payment system, Google Pay, WhatsApp Pay are riding the payment rails, and they have no problem in doing it. But it needs to settle inside the regulated sector. And so there's a good combination of regular financial sector and big tech, fintech. Needs to be AI compatible. The Indian payment system is in English. There are 24 other languages. in maybe 6 to 9 months, everyone will be able to access it in 26 languages. So that's, again, a big jump. It's today operating at 18 billion transactions a month. Do the arithmetic, it's over 200 billion a year. That's massive. Another 6 months, it will be 1 billion a day. So that's the scale up that's needed. Implementation is key. If you take this system and you globalize it, there are about 100 countries that will not be able to do it because they don't have the capacity to maintain a sophisticated technological system. So I think in the next 6 to 9 months, and this is some of the work that will come out of the Bretton Woods Committee, you will see a rapid move to a cloud-based digital public infrastructure as a service. When I look around this room, I mean, half the people are my age. So when we were working, we all had these departments in our institutions who would write the programs, and then we would have to do it. Today it's SaaS. Software is in the cloud, everyone gets it down. So that's where this is going. And that allows you to scale it up to Africa, where every country doesn't have to redo their architecture. So implementation will be a big part of this.
So do you see India, sort of selling this as an export service, as a service to other countries? Because they developed the platform, they developed the technology.
So many countries in Asia have tried it. India has tried it. China has tried it. It is very difficult to sell the identity slab of this architecture. So in this architecture, you have identity, you have payments, and then you have data. So that's sort of the 3 levels. Identity is very difficult to sell because they are very fearful.
Privacy issue.
Yeah. And they're fearful that it is transmitting information to India. And so in that sense, putting it in the cloud will solve it because the cloud companies are willing to give the encryption key to the country that's using it.
Interesting. I'm going to ask a question for all of you. So the paper that Siddharth mentioned was on cross-border payments, and I think we view that as a very attractive use case for this technology because cross-border payments, especially for remittances, are extraordinarily expensive, and they're actually very slow as well. So the interesting question I have is how do you, and there are some countries that have made quite a bit of progress, and there's Project Nexus that the BIS is putting in place for interlinking a number of Asian countries. But how do you take this globally? How do you the progress has been, I sort of felt like they're on a feasible path, but the progress is quite slow. How do you get this process sped up?
Well, I'm happy to start. I mean, in some ways, it gets back to the policy message, right? We, the West, you could argue, won the actual space race when the political leadership gave us a destination. It was the John F. Kennedy moment. By the end of the decade, we'll land on the moon. But yet, unfortunately, I think so much of the technology conversation, I think Siddharth has made the right points. Tech is often the easy part. It's all of the rest of it, the entrenchment, the incumbency, the regulatory questions that are fair. But we have to move from a risk-based conversation to an opportunity-based conversation, because in some ways, the tech is, in fact, the easy part. If you take just the experience of the stablecoins, good or bad, like them or not, they're global. This is the perfect medium of exchange for Thomas Friedman's hot, flat, and crowded world. And you and I don't send cross-border emails. We send instant messages to trusted counterparties, irrespective of where they are in the world. And this innovation, as an extension of banking and payments, is in fact exactly that proxy for money and value exchange. And so it is genuinely a global phenomenon. And the question to be asked is, how do we then, instead of regulate this innovation to death, or how do we enforce this to death, how do we make it an extension of the very type of fast payment systems that the Indian continent has an advantage of, and show that it isn't just an intranet of value that you could create with these novel technologies, but that you could in fact also extend them through extranets and internets as well. And so in some ways, they're also compatible with one another, and that the more compatibility and proximity to unequivocally banking and payments and prudential activity, not commodities and securities activities, the better. The Europeans have done this, by the way. Under the markets and crypto assets framework, stablecoins are treated as an extension of electronic money rules. So the whole of the European market has a common framework with legal clarity for the end user for this product. But the product's core features, at least on that side of the market, is internet-based money that is instantly payable and receivable to trusted counterparties. And that should be an extension of fast payment systems, domestic payment systems, not in competition with them.
You guys are sort of in a little different place where you have 50 states regulating money transmitters. How do you deal with that?
Well, I mean, in some ways, I've testified in Congress, and I have been at this for a little while. If you upload the U.S. dollar onto the internet, that's your fast track to getting summoned everywhere. But I think in some respects, the U.S. fintech constitutional crisis is a feature, not a bug. Our state oversight of payments and insurance, two really critical industries, has allowed for really novel companies to emerge, be it Stripe and Apple Pay and PayPal and many others have emerged from that regime. What we need, and the real way we will, quote, win the digital currency space race, is a federal framework that ensures that the end users of these technologies, be it stablecoins or other products in the future, have legal assurances that rival what the Europeans have done. So we're advocating for a harmonization and up-leveling of those two regimes as opposed to a race to the bottom, which sadly has defined the maiden decade of crypto, is that the innovators have been overwhelmed by, frankly, human failures, not technological ones. Greed, fear of missing out, and all these issues have driven more risk to the sector than the technology has.
Other comments on this? Cross-border payments?
Well, maybe, I mean, of course, I wouldn't have the courage to liken the G20 to the former President Kennedy of this country. But it is true that actually the G20 already many years ago has set some very concrete targets for faster, for cheaper, for more transparent and more inclusive payments in its payments roadmap, and the FSB was asked to coordinate that roadmap among the financial regulatory community. That being said, it is true these have been translated into quantitative targets, but it is true that implementation has been uneven. So there are some payment corridors in which these targets are being met, but unfortunately there are also payments corridors where I think we're still pretty far off meeting these targets. Initially, they were intended for 2027. We have recently communicated that this is not, that we will not make that deadline, at least not on a global scale. Yeah, what is crucial is that not only do we need interoperability, so the interlinking of fast payment system, but there also needs to be regulatory consistency. And of course, the types of regulation that come to mind here are particularly AML, CFT types regulation. So it is quite a challenge, like it was perhaps to set a man on the moon. It's quite a challenge to get there. It's a challenge that also requires the private and the public sector to cooperate, because at the end of the day, it's the private sector that will have to make most of these IT investments to make it happen. But I still believe we shouldn't give up, because it is really for certain parts in the world, as you said, the cost of remittance are so high. This is just bread on the table for these people. So I think it behooves us as the global community to keep putting in our efforts and to make sure that we do not only make progress in the more advanced parts of the world, but that we don't forget that there is also a less advanced part of the world for which it is even more important that we satisfy these targets that we've set ourselves.
Siddharth, any comments?
So broadly, there are two worlds there. One's digitalized and one's tokenized. In the digital world, there are maybe 70 instant payment systems. Within that, three regions, and these are big regions, United States, Europe, and China. The market penetration is minimal for fast payment system. I'm hopeful that Europe will get there, but United States and China will not. The people are very they're very satisfied with the cards in this country, and it's not going to get there. And I don't think a fast payment system will break the monopoly of Tencent and Alipay in China. So first, you need to go from 70 to 190. Second, you need to go deep. And BIS has this project Nexus that should be pursued. Effort needs to be expanded globally. And the reality is, it's just a matter of time, 5 years when all of you, me, everything in this room will get tokenized, right? And when we are in that world, in the payment system, you'll be in two spaces, whether it's CBDCs or stablecoins that were talked about. And last year, Carstens and Nilekani talked about a world where everything would be tokenized, not just the financial assets that would be tokenized, but non-financial assets like this bottle of water or a painting. And in that world, it's an amazing concept where things would move, smart contracts would be attached to these tokens, they would automatically execute. But that world is a way far out because you need harmonized standards for unified ledgers. You would need interoperability across the ledgers, a robust regulatory system. But that is the aim that one needs to have in their mind, a totally tokenized system that not just for the financial assets, but for every asset, including human beings.
We'll see if we get there during our lifetime. Mr. Pierce, any thoughts on this?
I'll stay out of this one since it's outside my remit.
So I'm going to turn back to you. Okay, artificial intelligence. A lot of use cases, innovation's happening really fast. Suggests to me that it's going to be pretty difficult to regulate it because you're always going to be sort of behind where it is. So what challenges do you think AI pose for regulation in the financial sector?
Well, I think there are challenges, there are also opportunities. I think it can be a good tool for regulators to use, of course, with proper protections so that regulators don't trample over financial privacy, but I think it can be useful. AI is not new. It's been used by the entities we regulate for a long time. And you're right that the pace of innovation is really fast now, and I think that's exciting. It can be very tempting, I think, when something like AI comes out for a regulator to say, we've got to come out with a comprehensive regulatory solution for AI. But then my question is, well, what are we solving, right? If there are problems, if the technology is creating some new issue in our space, let's look at that issue. Let's identify whether it's one that's a market failure that will be corrected, or is it something that we need to have a regulatory solution for? And if we need that kind of solution, how can we craft it in a way that allows the innovation to move forward and puts the minimum burden on people possible? So I think actually we don't need to do anything immediately. We certainly need to be educating ourselves, talking to academics, industry folks who are using the technology, try to stay on top of things as much as possible. But really, when I look at AI and I look at humans are more complicated than AI, and we've managed to regulate them for many years now. So I'm optimistic that we can handle AI.
Klaus?
Well, yeah, just in some ways I share that optimism, but we, of course, the financial system is rife with all kinds of interconnectedness, and I think the question that we've been asking ourselves is to what extent can AI give rise to additional forms of interconnectedness or stronger forms of interconnectedness. And there is, of course, there is the potential for that, right? There is, of course, third-party dependencies, service provider concentrations are possibly there. You can have the risk of correlated trading strategies, correlated pricing. Cyber risks are also part of it. So I think there is something to watch specifically in AI over and above what we would normally already do in financial services. The question, of course, the relevant is what can you do about it? Well, first, I think looking at data gaps and information available. Is the information really available that allows us to make an assessment of these vulnerabilities? Secondly, ask yourself whether there are sufficient supervisory and regulatory capabilities to assess AI. And then to also look at our regulatory and supervisory frameworks, whether there is sort of AI can be incorporated into these frameworks or not. So it's again, I think, a different manifestation of some of the risks that we know quite well, but with the potential of intensification because the world is moving so fast and also a lot faster than in traditional forms of finance.
Let me follow up with both of you. How do the regulators stay sort of up to speed? You know, one of the problems with all this technological innovation is the people, as they come out of Berkeley and Stanford and MIT, they go into the private sector. Typically, they don't go into the public sector. How do you get the right people in your organizations so that they can make informed judges about technology?
I mean, I think one way to do it, there are a lot of people who want to spend some amount of their career in the government, and I think it's trying to, you know, make it clear that we welcome not only lawyers and accountants, but we welcome people who have that technical expertise. I think that's probably the best thing that we can do. And then once they get into the agency, we have to make it not frustrating for them. And I think that's not easy because when the people who know that these technologies also have identified ways that regulators can use them to make themselves more effective. And if you tell someone who comes into an agency, sorry, but we're not using any of that. Well, yeah, if they come and tell us we're doing it wrong, and we tell them you're doing it wrong and you're moving too fast and we can't let you try these tools, and then they just leave in exasperation. So we have to be careful about that. But I think it really is important to try to attract some of those people so that they can help us think through these types of problems that you raised.
How are you finding it, Klaus, in terms of?
Well, I mean, that's of course difficult. I mean, there is always the traditional division of, let's say, roles, developments, that innovation takes place within the industry. That's where the action is. And as a supervisor or a regulator, you're always one step behind because then you observe what's going on in the industry. Then you have to start thinking, okay, what does it mean for our mandate of safety and soundness? What are the risks and how can these risks be dealt with? So I think being a step behind of the industry has always been there. That's also healthy because that's, again, where the innovation needs to take place. It is, in this area, is really challenging to find enough people that also want to be on the other side. But then again, there are also enough people with a more public profile which are not all that risk-seeking themselves and are more risk-averse. That's the type of people we generally attract in the labor market. And they're also there in, let's say, the part of the labor market where these skills are available. But I'm not going to downplay it. It is a challenge to find qualified supervisory and regulatory staff in this area.
Dante, I'm going to ask you a question about, from the private sector's perspective, what's your vision for AI applied to the financial sector?
Yeah.
What use cases do you think are most close to actually being implemented, and how will that actually change how we do business?
I mean, for one, I would argue that, just putting on a regulatory hat for 30 seconds, we're used to one next to choke. And so we have entity-based and activity-based regulation. Where I think we have often failed, unfortunately, is in the tech neutrality test. The other test that I think we need to apply more fairly is principles will age better than prescriptions. And there's so many recent examples of very prescriptive regulations that won't fare well and won't be future-proof.
Because the setup's different.
Precisely. The other comment I would make is in extending the regulatory discussion is we have to go from entity and activity-based regulation to also regulating code and conduct. And by code and conduct, I mean literal code audits and the conduct and the behaviors of, be it novel assets and novel activities. But therein, too, there's exponential gains to be made for the regulators. For example, here in the United States, when the Colonial Gas Pipeline was held for ransom in crypto not monolithic any more than banks, was the medium of exchange for the ransomware attack, aren't we better off that we had firms that could help track, trace, and in this case, retrieve the funds? And so even in cases where the assets might be completely decentralized and distributed, we're better off because we have a public-private partnership, if you will, that tries to guard the entirety of this novel financial system and not just leave it to the shadows and the edges. And I think that's a wholesale upgrade of a lot of the infrastructure. And so I think AI is not going to take your job. Somebody who uses AI might take your job. And so, we got to start having a more pragmatic technology discussion in which, instead of looking at the Terminator movie as the end state with AI, we look at something kind of in the middle. Glorified Clippy, maybe I'm dating myself, is in fact the place where it's probably going to land. But in our company, we have incentivized every single person in the firm to be capable and proficient with AI in the same way that they had to be once upon a time with Microsoft Excel and using the internet.
I'm going to turn to Siddharth. Everything we've been talking about has a huge data component to it. So, and to bring that up to the next generation requires significant investment and regulation. So what do you think the challenges are? And talk about the Indian situation, because they seem to be farther along than a lot of countries. What are the lessons learned? What are the challenges?
Two things here. The first is, I think most of Asia, when you look at it, it's probably true here too, but most of Asia, society is divided into three sections. The top 10% have 60% of wealth, income. The next 30% have 30% of wealth and income. And the bottom 55% have 10% of wealth and income. The bottom 55 had no access to capital because they are unable to post tangible collateral. And these are economies with low ticket, high volume transactions. So the question is, can you create information collateral that can lessen the burden on tangible collateral? And the Indian answer is yes, you can do it. To do it, you need to, what technologists call, you need to move from platforms to protocols. That's what you need to move on. Can this be done in a manner that promotes innovation and data privacy? I think the answer is yes. There is a third way to do it. To rely on the market is to lose data privacy. To rely on a system where there's heavy regulation is to lose innovation. In the Indian context, what they've done is that they've embedded the privacy protocols in the system and then let the innovators free at the back end to innovate and do what they want to do. And in that manner, it has succeeded. And I think the challenge in all of this is, I don't know about all of you, but when I download an app, it takes me less than 3 seconds to say I agree. Right? I never read the thing.
All the documentation.
And ex ante consent is broad and sweeping because you're giving your consent for things that have not happened or will happen in 20 years. So that's one. The second one is that data is usually stored in incompatible formats in different silos. You don't have access to it. So in India, they've started a data exchange system where all the GDPR laws and rules are embedded into the act. The point of departure is that the privacy protocols are built into the system. So if you use the system, you're complying with the privacy protocols. It's fairly new. But it's a big country, 1.5 billion people. So if you do something in million, doesn't matter. So it's about 9 months old. There are 150 million consumers that have signed on. About 95% of the banking system has signed on. And to date, data-based lending is somewhere around 200 million or so. It's still low by country standards, but I think this is an example where you could reach out to the bottom part of the population that has been pushed out of the system. But you do need to be able to embed these protocols into the system.
We only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to turn to Dante and ask a question. What can the international institutions, BIS, FSB, World Bank, IMF, do to support the development of these technologies and their implementation? And then get Commissioner Pearson, President Klaus, not to respond.
Yeah. Well, I have to be very careful because I don't want to be declared non grata. But I think it's time for us to shift the debate to watch what they do, not what they say. If you think about the countries that have permissioned in these activities and these technologies, the whole of Europe has done it. The United States will eventually do it. Many countries in Asia have done it. The future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And I really think it's important that the international institutions move from a risk-based discussion to an opportunity-based discussion. And for the first time ever in human history, the very technologies that Siddharth just described are accessible to anyone, anywhere. And that's why, in many respects, this technology wave is a correction on the misdeeds of big tech and the misdeeds of a technology model that dominated single postal codes as opposed to were more broadly distributed. And so I think there's a big opportunity there. Now, of course, technology alone is not a panacea for the world's problems, but it often shows us where we're falling short. And all of these issues, we're falling short.
Do you think the official institutions are too risk-averse in this
100%. 100%. In part
I thought you might say that.
In part because, in fairness, the public institutions are answerable to the citizen for the failure of these things when they fail. And that's why I do think if you're going to get this model to work, you can create accountability to entities, whether you're a token issuer or a stablecoin issuer. You ought to have a universal accountability for that product functioning everywhere, irrespective of the technology on which it rides. We've got to push for outcomes as opposed to policy paralysis.
So from your perspective, Commissioner Pierce, what does good look like from the SEC's perspective?
Well, I mean, I think it is to go ahead.
Compare and contrast what you hope things will be over the next 4 years in contrast to the last 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is to recognize the fact that it does sometimes take more courage to allow things to allow innovators to innovate. I mean, it really should, that should be the expectation that people will be able to get products and services out there that meet a market need. And it can be very easy to become extremely risk averse and to forget that there's a cost when you say no also. I think you do have to, you can't forget the risks, but you have to remember that there's a real opportunity cost if you say no always to innovation. And I do think that international bodies of regulators, you put a bunch of regulators in a room together and they all get each other all fired up about all the risks, and they forget to think about the opportunities. And again, it's not to say that there aren't risks. We can all learn from each other, and I think we should be talking about those risks that cross borders, but we should be remembering that we're serving no one if we just try to use the regulatory system to cut innovation off before it blossoms.
Klaus, I'm going to give you the last word.
Yeah, no, that would also not clearly be the description of how I would see our mandate. No, I think we try to be technologically neutral, so we approach new developments from the principle same activity, same risk, same regulation. And by translating that into recommendations or a global regulatory framework, what we try to provide is, of course, regulatory certainty. We try to provide what are the parameters within which innovation can actually flourish, and these benefits can also be harnessed. So that is one thing that I think we produce. And the second thing is international cooperation. Because, again, these are global products, global developments, so you want to have something of a level playing field. You want to make sure that the playing field is equal in different parts of the world. And you want to also limit the potential for, let's say, cross-border spillovers. That lax regulation in one part of the world creates a lot of damage in another part of the world, because that is not good for our mutual atmosphere, I can assure you, if these things happen.
It's a good plug for the Bretton Woods Committee, International Cooperation and Coordination. Thank you. Thank you all.
All right. They don't look asleep. This is the last session.
Yeah, sorry.
This is the last session before the cocktail hour.
Wow.
So these are the truly dedicated. But well, welcome, Mr. Chairman. This is a great honor to have you here. We were recalling that it's been several years since a member of Congress has come to the Bretton Woods Committee, and we think it's a really appropriate time, and definitely given your perch chairing the Financial Services Committee, for you to come and speak with us. Just to maybe acquaint the audience with your background, French is a deeply experienced person, not just in government, but also in the private sector. So he worked for the precursor to the NEC.
I did.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Under George H.W. Bush, was at the Treasury Department, founded and ran a bank, and now is a member of Congress and chairman of the committee that oversees, or has jurisdiction over the IFIs. And so it's a great honor to be here with you today. Maybe just to start off, we're here at the Bretton Woods Committee. Trade is a critical part of the global economy, informs a lot of how certainly people here are thinking and approaching the week. And you follow financial markets closely, so there are people here from the financial sector. So do you think markets and participants have a good understanding of what the president's trying to achieve and where that landing zone is? Talk to us a little bit about how you're currently reading the policy situation here.
Well, I don't think the markets have clarity about the president's ultimate landing zone, as you describe it, on tariffs. And I think that's created the uncertainty in both the fixed income and the equity markets, or at least contributed to it. People could argue stock prices were very, very high over the course of 2024 and early 2025, and therefore some correction might have been merited. But my view is that the president's trying to do several tariff strategies all at once, and some of those are in conflict with each other. And for example, to use tariffs as a sanction, meaning if you don't accept this repatriation of citizens, or if you don't help us interdict fentanyl, that might be considered a very short-term strategic use of a sanction, a tariff like a sanction. But then you have this issue of across-the-board tariffs across all imports. You have strategic categories where the president's goal is to have more long-term investment and employment here, like in steel and aluminum connected to national security interest or semiconductors. You have the issue of reciprocity, of lowering reciprocity, removing non-tariff barriers, lowering tariff barriers. And my judgment is some of these things are in conflict with each other. Some are best handled by a bilateral negotiation or a specific targeted tariff rather than being across the board. And so I think that accounts for some of the unease in the markets and among the business community is tell us what the outcome is that you'd like, and let's work towards that point. And I think that still appears to be under development.
You wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago going through the history of tariff authority, really, and Congress's role in that. And one thing that you argued for was to actually grant the president trade promotion authority. We have negotiations underway, right? We have delegations coming through Washington. There are some that are here this week. Talk to me a little bit about, or tell us a little bit about how you see TPA, right, as it's known here in Washington, being supportive or helping to provide that clarity or helping the U.S. achieve its objectives.
Well, I think trade promotion authority is the Congress granting their Article I authority to the executive for negotiating trade treaties for commercial purposes and setting tariffs. And this dates back really to 1934, after the Congress just wore itself out setting tariff rates between, say, 1830 and 1930. They just literally couldn't do it anymore. They were literally meeting and going down lists of 3,000 and 4,000 and 5,000 items and setting a tariff rate in the Ways and Means Committee. And so they said, we got to get out of this business. We have an income tax now in our country. So they granted trade promotion authority to the president back in 1934, and we've updated that many, many times since then. Most recently in 2015, the Congress authorized, during the Obama administration, Trade Promotion Authority, granting the parameters around which the president could negotiate a multilateral trade arrangement or a bilateral arrangement and submit that to the Senate for ratification. That's the point of it. And that expired. Joe Biden let that Trade Promotion Authority expire in the summer of 2021. I think that was a mistake, and I think the Congress should have reauthorized it then. But the Congress did not. And so I would think that would be in President Trump's interest to have TPA authority under the Republican Congress in the House and Senate authorize TPA authority, because the last president to use it successfully was who? Donald Trump. That's how USMCA was brought to the Congress, negotiated between the three countries, and then ratified. So I think that's one way Congress can best handle their oversight of the executive on trade.
Let's move a little bit to the World Bank. We had President Bonga here earlier, and I think maybe something this audience may not fully appreciate is just how much you've been kind of a thought leader on this in Congress over the years. You gave an interview recently to DevEx, and you talked about kind of this concept of having MDBs return to their core mission. What does that look like in your view? For those that didn't quite catch that, I mean, elucidate a little bit about where you see the core focus of these institutions, where it should be placed.
Well, I think the core focus of our multilateral development banks, obviously starting with the World Bank itself, is helping nations, particularly low-income nations, develop an economy that works for more of their citizens. I mean, the bottom line is the mission should be to eradicate poverty. It should be to have work and education and clean water and public health policies that work for the citizens in those countries. That should be at the heart of it. And I noted in this year's annual report, the World Bank, they said that 45% of their lending was related to climate. And no doubt some climate-related investments benefit low-income citizens and perhaps work to eliminate poverty. But, half the lending of the bank is dedicated towards climate instead of focusing on poverty. In that same annual report, if my memory's right, climate was mentioned, over 100 times, and HIV/AIDS or malaria or some other public health crisis, clean drinking water wasn't mentioned. So I think we're off course. I think that should be the function of our multilateral development banks.
Think about, so maybe I'll press on that a little bit. There was this concept, right, that's been kind of layered on, right, the MDBs more recently about they need to serve a purpose to kind of address, and finance global public goods, right? And so that, commonly, right, as you described it was climate, there are some aspects of that trickles into public health, right, pandemic preparedness. How do you see kind of the institutions playing in those spaces, or do you think the primary focus should be on this poverty alleviation and then see what co-benefits flow from that for these other benefits?
Well, there's no doubt that there are some public goods where the Venn diagram of poverty eradication, uplifting public health, and citizens' educational standards and their participation in the economy, and some larger goal like climate can overlap. A classic Venn diagram, I'm sure, that would have been embraced by our former vice president. But fundamentally, I still believe that it should be focused on that public health issue. Think about power. Power is a public good. Electricity generation, in my judgment, could be considered its infrastructure. But without electricity, how do you have clean water? How do you have access to education and lighting and power to have businesses? And I'm a believer, as I've made clear, in all of the above energy policies, because if you put people first, having access to low-cost power, is important to those public goods of education, health, and welfare.
So it appears, right, and the president was here earlier talking about what his agenda looks like and some of the changes that are underway there. It appears he may have taken a page out of your playbook, right? At least the roadmap you've been trying to lay out in Congress through hearings, through op-eds in the media on a different energy strategy for the World Bank. And a key component of that, and it was talked about here earlier, was nuclear.
Right.
Can you talk about kind of the, how is that being received in Congress, right? I mean, how are you watching that from Capitol Hill?
Well, our members authored a bill to encourage our managing directors from the Treasury to the multilateral banks to encourage that nuclear financing not be taken off the table. It strikes me that you're just, if climate is your number one issue and you think a carbon-free future is essential to life on Earth, then how can you ignore the advances in technology that have led to the small modular nuclear reactor business, the fact that, like France for 60 years has used reprocessed fuel to generate nuclear power. We don't do that in the United States, so we have parking lots full of spent nuclear rods. So you have a smaller footprint, you have a cleaner technology, you have a lower cost technology, you have a technology that could last 100 years once it was constructed. Why would you take off the table nuclear power to generate the ultimate clean source? So that's point one. I recognize that not every country is capable of managing or handling that. That's a given. I got that. We're not imposing it on anyone. We're saying that right now you don't even finance it. And we've worked to have our Ex-Im Bank agree to finance exports that are related to nuclear technology. So this isn't to step it outside the bound of what's appropriate, but I think the Koreans, the Japanese, the Dutch, the French, the Americans all have the ability to produce nuclear power, and I want to see more competition. That I don't want to be the default nuclear energy developer as China or Russia. I don't think that's in the interest of the world.
Are there other bills or legislation the committee's contemplating that you hope will have the same kind of signaling value to shape policy?
Well, we did. That was a bipartisan bill, by the way, that we marked up a few weeks ago, and it'll go to the House floor. And I think it sends that signal. I'm so pleased that our president of the World Bank referenced that. I just believe in an all of the above energy strategy if your goal is global development, poverty eradication, lifting people up. Think about not investing in the fossil fuel business in Nigeria, and you let it languish, and you don't let it be at the highest and best use. You don't have it effectively managed. You don't remove the theft. You don't remove the loss. You have 200 million people that'll be on the doorstep of moving to Europe, I guess. So we need to plan for the future, and I think nuclear should be a part of that from a clean power point of view. But we've got to recognize that our development bank should be fully participating in making sure the energy needs of the globe's people are available. And there's even more pressure on that due to the electrification demands through global technology advance like artificial intelligence and large language model processing.
So we have the managing director of the IMF here in the audience, and she was here earlier addressing this crowd. And one thing that she spoke about that's in her global policy agenda, right, is kind of ending the repeat, kind of unending kind of borrowing, right, of some countries. And my views on this are known certainly by Kristalina and others, but that this is not a healthy way to run, right? Also not healthy for the country, right? One thing that we didn't hear, right, from the World Bank, right, is that there's a focus on graduation. Yep. And so talk to me a little bit about kind of where you see that going, right, and what you would like to see there and what you think is achievable.
Well, I think that's an important point. It's an important point generally. And when you have public finance, when you have taxpayer money at risk or a public entity that's run by essentially global politicians at the top, it's tough because you have to reach consensus. But we see that in our own country. I just want to use one real world example in America, and that is our flood insurance program that we've had in our country since 1968. It's the only place where the federal government, well, I'll leave out terror insurance, but the only fundamental place inside the economy where the federal government's on the hook for the first dollar of loss in a residential or commercial building inside a flood zone. But since 1968, we've been very reluctant to reform the program. And therefore, our taxpayers have rebuilt the same house in the same lot over and over and over again. And after Katrina, $750 million was lost due to not being used for resiliency. It was just people bought a boat or did something else with it. They didn't lift their house. And the percentage of rebuilding was offensive. And so this is not a new thing when you have politicians and money. But I think it's a worthy goal for the IMF to have, whether it's a 19th century serial violator of this concept, Argentina, for example, or a more modern country in the nation. And so I believe in graduation, and I think that helps you build relationships with the elected officials in parliamentary bodies that vote to support our multilateral institutions. You've heard it from President Trump directly, but you've heard it over and over again in the Congress under Republican and Democratic leadership for, I'll say, up to 20 years, that China should be graduated from their line of credit at the World Bank or the access to funding they have at the Asian Development Bank. And you will win over your oversight responsibility, your leadership responsibility if we do that. And so enough is enough at some point. And the whole mission of the IMF is to put people on a sustainable footing. And that's been our mission at the IMF for decades now. And it's tough. But I think it's an important step. And I think we ought to all, as directors and board members of both these institutions, have that as a goal in our planning, is that we will graduate either serial offenders in the case of the IMF or just countries that no longer should be qualified as a developing country in the case of the World Bank.
So kind of turning a bit to the IMF, talk to me a little bit about how you see the IMF fitting in with kind of U.S. strategic or foreign policy objectives, and how your colleagues in Congress kind of look at this institution.
Well, look, I believe strongly in our multilateral institutions. I just think they're unwieldy in terms of management, and it's a challenging job to have the leadership of any of them, and it requires a lot of diplomatic skills and stick-to-itiveness, but it also requires particularly the market economies, the large developed market economies, to stick together and help enforce reform. And the United States should be a leader in that effort, but we're not alone at all in that effort. And so in the case of the IMF, that's particularly important, I think, to the United States, is a multilateral forum whereby we can insist on debt transparency and push back against countries that would have a predatory, self-centered indebtedness policy as part of their foreign policy. I won't name any particular countries in that regard, but the College of William and Mary has done a marvelous job capturing the lack of transparency, the predatory terms and conditions, and that's why I was not a fan of the common framework that the G20 cooked up. It was a step in the right direction, I will acknowledge that, but it doesn't get the job done. I think the IMF and the World Bank should insist that when they are doing an analysis of a country, seeking a renewal or an extension of credit or a new balance of payment line, that by golly, they ought to have full transparency on the private sector and public sector borrowings, what the terms are, what the conditions are, and then we should, through technical assistance in these organizations, work outwardly along with our diplomats and our embassies around the world and other like-minded countries to what bad looks like. You're making a short-term expedient decision, but this is what bad looks like. And I think that over and over again, whether we're talking about Sri Lanka or Zambia or Ecuador, or there are plenty of examples that everybody in this room knows a lot more about than I do, but I think it's in alignment if we want greater transparency and we want market-based values to help lift people up out of poverty. And I think collectively since World War II, the developed countries working through the trading system and working through our multilateral have accomplished extraordinary things, including in China, where poverty has seen the largest change.
I want to talk to you a bit about Ukraine. Few people might not know, but you've been quite involved in Ukraine issues for some time. You've made several trips to the country while it's been at war. I recall just a few days after I had retired, it's funny to use that word, retired from the IMF, you called me the day Ukraine was invaded, and I already had lots of ideas about how to assist the country and what the U.S. should do. What do you kind of see as Ukraine's future in a post-conflict scenario? What are the roles of institutions like the World Bank and the IMF in that context?
Well, both have been immensely supportive, and we're grateful for the IMF's leadership there. We're particularly grateful for the World Bank serving as a clearinghouse and agent in accounting for all the multilateral financial assistance, including in partnership, with USAID over the past several months. So we appreciate that leadership. But in the planning for redevelopment, I think those two institutions working with the European Union, have an enormous role to play to make sure that Ukraine is fully integrated into Europe and can reject the nonsense that we've seen since February of 22. I mean, my advice is that we should be putting more heat on the Russian Federation. We did that in Congress early on, but in my view, this is my personal view, the G7 countries, President Biden, didn't keep that heat on because they wanted to operate on consensus in Europe. And I think that was a mistake. I think if the United States had stood up and put more pressure financially in the trading system and in the sanctions design, that we would have put more heat a lot earlier, a lot more effectively on the Russian economy and the Russian individual people in their country to let them know what a beastly, thing this was to invade Ukraine. And so both on the military support side and on the economic side, I believe that, the coalition could have done better. And I'm not saying that with the benefit of hindsight. I mean, I've said it consistently since February 3 years ago. So I would increase sanctions on Russia today, including all the banking system and all the energy system that's not currently sanctioned. I would work with Europe to achieve secondary sanctions on the people who are trading with Russia on the black market or openly. I would fully implement the Repo Act, which is supported by unanimous vote in the Council of Europe. The bill Mike McCall and I drafted, that we worked in conjunction with Senator Risch, and then we passed and President Biden signed into law, the Repo Act. We had bipartisan consensus in the House and Senate, signed into law, and it got, in my judgment, watered down in the European consensus building. But not 100% of the countries in the Council of Europe voted to do it. What is that? It is, don't freeze the Russian assets, take the Russian assets. I appreciate everybody freezing them. That's very, we do that all the time. Let's change title. If the Russian Federation acts in a responsible way, they can have them back. But we have a compromise where we've now made a loan to Ukraine, and I would not have had those terms and conditions, but it's better than not doing anything. But if you want to send a message to Moscow, use repo. My message to President Trump is add sanctions to Russia, use repo fully, engage the family of nations to be tougher, not weaker, not looking down at their shoes for a photo op. That's what we need to be doing. And I think that will pursue a better, environment from which to, quote, negotiate.
I want to close on one topic that's been active in your committee recently, which is on digital finance, digital assets, and the STABLE Act. Acquaint this audience a bit of what the STABLE Act is when it passed your committee, and why you think it's so critical and why the president has prioritized this legislation on stablecoins.
Yeah. Look, for 60 years, we've had such an exceptional payment system in our world, and it's been amazing. We've gone from writing each other checks and bankers' acceptances and opening up correspondent banking accounts, and we signed patiently all those traveler's checks and put them in the money belt that our moms gave us, that somehow that was going to protect us in that very angry fight we were in Sao Paulo at a soccer game, you know. But we've morphed that to the global system of essentially FedWire and SWIFT. We've seen the advent of credit. We've seen the advent of debit. It's been amazing. Now, real-time payments. So a future payment rail that will be added to what we have is a blockchain payment rail. And to use that effectively, you have to have a tokenized payment that is part of a smart contract or not, at retail or in business, commercial. And in our view here in the United States, we believe it should be a dollar-backed stable coin. It's a dollar-backed payment stable coin issued under U.S. law by the private sector, both issued by bankers or non-banks, subject to the same capital standards, AML, BSA standards, regulatory standards, supervisory standards. And both the Senate and the House have now passed this inaugural bill in committee. Bill Hagerty, my old friend and great classmate from Vanderbilt, wrote the Senate version, and Brian Stile from Wisconsin wrote the House version. We've now passed that in both committees. It's an important extension of that payment system that's been essentially dollar-based for all these years since Bretton Woods 1.0. And it would be used both in business and in retail. Probably more so by international business, anything that crosses border. And it's in my judgment, we need a global standard on it. And right now, the payment stablecoin issuers either are under New York law or some extraterritorial jurisdiction. And we think this would be really good for the reserve currency status of the dollar, really good for innovation because it would allow people to invent new products and services in finance in the US and be able to export that business, and we would have dominance in this new niche of financial services. Accompanying it, we had our first hearing 2 weeks ago on, is a market structure bill. Because if you just have a stablecoin bill, all you have is that. But it doesn't tell you who can own it, what do you do with it, who can custody it, how would it work? And so both in the House and Senate, we're working mightily together to create a market framework, a regulatory framework for all digital assets, the anchor of which would be the use of a dollar-backed stablecoin.
Well, that's all the time we have for today, but I want to thank you very much for coming.
Pleasure.
Please join me in.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Coming up during a recess.
Happy to do it. Happy to do it. Appreciate that.